The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield with support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I am your host, Carrie Saldo. Joining me in studio this week, NEPM news reporter Jill Kaufman and Tony Signoli, longtime Springfield resident and political consultant. And on the phone, we have Mass Live Politics editor John Misek. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And we begin this week with a story that got national news coverage from the likes of the New York Times and other outlets. And NEPM's own Adam Frenier was in court this week to cover details. Headline on this story: Walsh, Clinton avoid trial in Holyoke Soldiers Home COVID-19 outbreak cases. Here are the details. About 3 years after charges were brought, Bennett Walsh, the Holyoke Soldiers Home former superintendent, and David Clinton, its former medical director, received 3 months of probation and no jail time after admitting to sufficient facts to find them guilty. That continuance without a guilty finding we heard about at the top of the show. That happened in Hampshire Superior Court. They faced criminal neglect charges stemming from a deadly COVID-19 outbreak at the home in 2020 that killed at least 76 veterans. And family members of those who died just aren't having it. Here's what Susan Kenney said about former Holyoke Soldiers Home leader Bennett Walsh.
He was not present. He created a milieu of complacency, and he was no kind of leader at all.
Tony, a lot of pain, as we just heard in that clip from Susan Kenney. Yeah. And, we heard that from other family members this week as well, and that pain expressing itself in anger. What are your thoughts about the judge's ruling?
It's definitely something that's resonating with a lot of folks across Massachusetts, whether you knew or someone knew someone there, knew a family member, a victim, etc., or whether you had the other side of the story as well, too. There's a lot of people tuning into this again. We're seeing it in some of the monitoring that we're doing, some of the real-time polling. And it's interesting. The judge's ruling has gotten a lot of folks to think, wow, what's that about? How did that happen? How is that justice? On the flip side of it, what we're also picking up is that a lot of folks are re-engaging on the issue yet again and saying, where was the state? Where was the Commonwealth? These questions come up yet again. And certainly this is an issue now several years past, but it makes people all start to think about current state issues. Where is the Commonwealth? And that's not a shot at Healy or Baker before. It's in general. How protected am I when I send a loved one to someone like the Holyoke Soldiers Home? How protected am I when Mass DOT decides to redo the Alston Chalmers exit into Boston, etc.? People ask questions, and that's good.
Yeah. And to your point, Tony Signoli, when in the wake of this, we learned a lot about what had gone on at the Soldiers Home and what hadn't, and namely Charlie Baker's appointment of Bennett Walsh, which we'll dig into in a little bit. But John, I want to bring you in here. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell was displeased by Judge Edward McDonald's decision. She released a statement after the proceedings saying, quote, "Today the justice system failed the families who lost their loved ones at the Holyoke Soldiers Home." And Judge McDonough initially didn't want to touch this case. Eventually, the Supreme Judicial Court overturned that and said, no, you do have to take a look at this case. So knowing where McDonough sat in 2001 when he first heard this case, was it a big surprise that they received 3 months probation instead of the 3 years that the prosecutors were seeking?
I think I will say I was not in Massachusetts when all that came down, but this is a reminder, I think, Carrie, that even 4 years later on, the pandemic is still very much with us. Listening to that family members' very emotional testimony, we're still being touched by this later on, and policy choices made 3 and 4 years ago continue to resonate, and these are very difficult matters.
Joan Venaki had an opinion piece in the Boston Globe about this issue. She wants Governor Charlie Baker to take personal responsibility for hiring Walsh, who did not have a healthcare background. Obviously, he's a veteran, but no healthcare background. She pointed out that Walsh has deep political roots here in Western Mass, which some of us here in the area know full well. His parents, Springfield City Councilors. His uncle, William Bennett, was a longtime Hamilton County District Attorney. He also represented him in the case. Jill, your thoughts over under on Charlie Baker taking personal responsibility for hiring Walsh here?
Well, I think you look at the history of CEOs, CFOs, governors. There's a lot of people who Governor Baker had underneath him, including Mary Lou Sutters as public health, who made decisions, who helped him make decisions, signed documents, and did a lot of research before hiring someone. So he didn't take the fall. Mary Lou Sutters retired after 8 years of working under Baker, but did she retire because of what happened at the Holyoke Veterans Home? And I think that CEOs don't always take that fall. He could have changed his pronouns. I believe Joan Venaki quoted that this one's, I think it was, "This is on us." He didn't say, "This is on me."
Yeah. And Sutters was head of the Health and Human Services at the time, right?
Secretary.
Thank you. And thinking about change we've seen in the wake of this, one of the huge changes that came out of this moving forward is that there will be a requirement for superintendents of the Veterans Home to be a licensed nursing home administrator. So perhaps of little comfort to the families who've lost folks, but this new protection will be in place moving forward here. Obviously a difficult issue. John Misek, reporting for Mass Live earlier this week, the headline on this one, Top Dems, Mass Migrant Shelter System will sink under its own weight without action. And let me quickly give a bit of oversimplified context here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Last year, we saw Governor Maura Healey impose a 7,500 family cap on the shelter system, which houses both state residents and migrants. But cap smap, homelessness here isn't going anywhere. Neither is the need for people seeking refuge from places like Haiti, Central America, South America. And we have a law on the books, 40 years in the making, that requires Massachusetts to provide shelter to these folks. And that was created in obviously a very different political time. But now there's a push to update that system. And now that preamble leads me to my favorite sentence of the week, John. You wrote, quote, Monday, standing before reporters, Governor Healey, House Speaker Mariano, and Senate President Spilka were like a tableau from a Russian family novel, each unhappy in their own way. What has them so unhappy, Misek?
All right. So, today is March 31st. Carrie, there are competing supplemental funding bills in the House and Senate, and the clock is ticking for legislative leaders to pass some sort of negotiated version. The state is spending about $75 million a month on the shelter system. These are costs that they have to absorb, as you correctly point out, because of the state's right to shelter law, which obligates the state to provide at least emergency housing to families and to pregnant people with no other children. It's a law that's been on the books, as you point out, for about 40 years right now. The state will run out of money by April if no action is taken. And right now, there is no signal that an agreement is in the offing. On Monday, Healey, Spilka, and Mariano all acknowledged that something needed to be done. The path forward is slightly less clear. So they're staring at this looming funding cliff with no immediate agreement in sight.
Tony, to take John Misek's metaphor in a completely different direction, is there a path away from that Russian family discontent toward fairy tale happily ever after here, or no dice?
I think it's going to be very difficult to change that narrative. And I should recuse myself a bit. Of the three leaders that you just mentioned, two of them I had conversations with, and one, John, I've got to tell you, they loved that commentary on the Russian piece. So I will say, man, kudos to you. Because
kudos to Tolstoy. Wait a second. Let's just make sure we give credit where credit is due.
You're right.
I think my bosses are listening to this. So if you could send it
okay, man. So it's like Tolstoy through you, John. That was grand. But point to the question of what Carrie just said. This is not sexy stuff. This goes over the heads of voters and others. But this is a legislative re-election year for all the members of the House and the Senate. And some are starting to talk about this now. Because come April, come May, what does this mean? Watch John Vilas brilliantly said during the course of this week, I'm terrified. I've got people calling me about this. My problem is I want to do the right thing for these folks. On the flip side, I've got school superintendents, municipal chiefs telling me they're already having it telegraphed to them, cuts coming because of other financial issues in the Commonwealth. The average voter may put that together as saying, hey, I just lost 10 teachers, or goodness gracious, 4 firefighters. It can get into that kind of miasma. Do I think that it will? I hope not. But that's why I love that you all are covering this, because the average person doesn't realize there's the other side of it, not just doing the right thing by these folks, but there's the financial piece. Are we going to be able to afford this?
To your point, John Vilas, senator from this region.
Yeah.
And John, we saw, to Tony's point, the push-pull here, we saw protesters from Massachusetts Coalition for Immigration Reform gathered on Beacon Hill this week regarding this very issue. What were they saying?
In short, that they wanted these emergency hotels the state has taken over closed, and they want the right to shelter law revised. Neither of those things are going to happen, but this goes to sort of, I think, the building frustration among a lot of Massachusetts residents that they are seeing this, that there is no apparent end in sight, no apparent, Washington riding to the rescue, because as we saw in February, a compromise immigration deal completely collapsed. And I should point out that just yesterday, Speaker Mariano was at an event on Beacon Hill for celebrating immigrants, and he said that while they can probably paper this over with reserve accounts in fiscal 24-25, come fiscal 25-26, they could be staring down the barrel, as Tony said a second ago here, at spending cuts. And he literally said everything could be on the table as they look to address this. So I mean, that's pretty grim.
Yeah.
So to unfortunately return to the Russian family novel, that's a whole lot of unhappiness.
This is a topic for another talk show, Carrie. But Chapter 70 money also, which is school funding, and right now we are watching districts and town cities make decisions about school budgets, big cuts ahead, lots of transportation costs, many things. But to what you said, Tony, like where will the state make cuts? We can talk more about that.
Yeah, Jill, let me turn to some other reporting from you this week that after nearly a decade, speaking of schools, Holyoke schools are officially entering a transition process to end state control of the district's budget and many policies. And I want to start with this bit of audio from Erin Brunell, the vice chair of the Holyoke School Committee. She was speaking Monday night, and she had a question for acting Massachusetts Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education, Russell Johnston, who was here in Western Massachusetts at that meeting.
If I may just put you on the record, are you saying that you are officially recognizing that we're entering the transition process to exit receivership?
We are officially entering the transition process to return to local control.
Obviously, some excitement there at that news, Jill. But it was a bit of a rapid decision from Johnston, who came in the past few months after Jeff Riley stepped down for a family reason. Jill, did Johnston make it clear how he was able to arrive at this decision in such short order?
Well, I just want to say also what I left off that tape. I meant to give you a longer piece. Is that this was at the very end of the meeting, so there's an incredible amount of shock from the school committee. This was the very end of almost 2 hours of Johnston being in Holyoke at the high school.
He buried the lead.
No, I don't know if he buried the lead. He may have buried the lead, but it was just so you've been watching this since 2015, maybe. I've been covering this since about then, and the district had just petitioned the state in September-ish, and Jeff Riley was the commissioner then, to end receivership. That is with the approval of the state-appointed superintendent, Anthony Soto, who is on that school committee also. So was it a rapid decision? I don't know. I believe this was coming. And Russell Johnston had been in Western Mass at some point, right? He had worked on, he had been involved
West
in
Springfield,
this
yes, and elsewhere. Yes.
In elements. People at the department and educators outside the department speak quite fondly of him. He's a good mediator, and he's incredibly deeply in this. It appears from watching him at the table. So. I want to just say something else. Riley, Commissioner Riley, who did step down for family reasons, was not Governor Healy's selection.
Right.
And Mayor Garcia said Monday night to me that, and he said this before in public, that that Commissioner Riley and Governor Healy were not on the same page regarding receivership. So, I'll let you read between the lines.
Speaking of that specific issue of receivership, that came about not that long ago. It was part of the Achievement Gap Act of 2010, which allows the state to get involved if the school is deemed chronically underperforming, such as was the case in Holyoke, Lawrence, and Southbridge. John Mysek, are you hearing any whispers out there in Beacon Hill about needs for an update to this act, given that Holyoke was brought into this receivership process, the state took it over, and it's really not in a much better place academically than it was before the process started?
Yeah, I mean, this is likely going to get pulled into budget discussions, I imagine, as we move forward here. There are any number of public education issues that are kind of swirling around the spending plan on Beacon Hill. They've been holding hearings on Governor Healy's proposal. The House is expected to come out with its proposal, I believe, next week. So we could see, within the next 2 weeks, pardon me, so we could see a path forward on that.
Tony, your thoughts on, do you think this will kind of be the beginning of the end of state takeovers of public schools?
It could be, based on the fact that you don't see that much of a fiscal, financial, and academic impact and change, and yet the cost and the angst of these communities. And I just got to say this, Jill, kudos to you, because I was watching live that night, everything. And I should, again, I'm going to recuse myself a lot. So we had a role in this, but pro bono. This was not a client that we could charge money to. Josh Garcia, Aaron Brunel, you got to be kidding me, the last couple of weeks. And it goes back to when Commissioner Riley, at 5:27 on a Friday, says, I don't think we're going to do this just right yet. And Garcia and Brunel went to town, and I should say all the members of the school committee, and all these average, regular folks in the city of Holyoke who cared. They showed up. They met that weekend to talk about what do we do on a Saturday, on a Sunday, on the Friday before the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which is the high holy holiday in Holyoke, right? There they are again. And Jill, I just got to say, you were real time. No, seriously, you were live, because I'm watching the Holyoke chats as you're posting what's going on real time. You were first. You got it. And those Holyoke chats exploded. Hundreds and hundreds of people within 30 or 40 minutes got the news from you. So well done. That's why local is so important. And I could go off into a million. I just get so excited about this. Unbelievable.
And we love the excitement. We're pushing up against our break time. But just quickly, Jill, if I could, do we have any idea when Holyoke might regain this control in a hypothetical universe?
No, we know that by August, or it's starting of school, 2024-2025 year, there will be a plan in hand. That is the idea, at least, that they start school with a transition plan. I think we should take bets, if that's legal, a year from
As we go to break, we will take bets. We will be back here on The Rundown. We will talk details on the latest on Governor Healy's appeal to the federal government for a disaster declaration that could be helping Western Mass. You are listening to The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo. Welcome back to The Rundown here on NEPM. I am Carrie Saldo. In studio with me this week, Jill Kaufman and Tony Signoli, and on the phone, John Mysek, who I'm going to start with first now. Mysek, reporting for Mass Live this week, you wrote about 6 Massachusetts congressional lawmakers, including the entire Western Massachusetts congressional delegation, are backing Governor Maura Healey's appeal to a denied disaster declaration. I'm going to try to get the new mouth working here. Denied disaster declaration for impact of floods last September. That letter reads in part, quote, as climate change continues to bring unprecedented weather changes, we believe it is imperative that communities see strong partnership among federal, state, and local governments to deliver when residents need it most. John, remind us how we got here.
Sure. Last September, Bristol, Hampden, and Worcester County all got walloped by pretty heavy storms. There was destructive flooding. There was a broken water main in Springfield. There was widespread flooding across Worcester County, Leominster taking it on the chin, North Attleboro getting roads wiped out. So it was pretty destructive stuff. Carrie, the governor made her petition to the Biden administration asking for that emergency disaster declaration, which opens the taps to aid and loans and recovery and all of the stuff that it's going to take for these communities to bounce back. Feds came back and said, it was bad, but not bad enough, which is probably not news that officials or residents in those towns wanted to hear.
Absolutely not.
Healy appealed the denial. So that's in process. And as you said this week, Senator Elizabeth Warren, along with some other federal lawmakers, Richard Neal, Representative McGovern, Trahan, and Jake Auchincloss, all jumped on, called on the White House and FEMA to back the state's request. So we will see if that is successful or not. But they are quite correct. You don't have to look out any further than your window to know that the weather's getting heavier and heavier all the time.
Yeah, and as I was reading your story, it occurred to me, John, and Tony as well, that this letter, I think, opens up a discussion about who pays for what in the face of climate change. Tony, do you think you would say yes to this, that saying yes to this disaster declaration might set a precedent that the Biden administration does not want to set in the face of climate change?
You are exactly on target. That's exactly what the fear is in Washington. But it's an election year, and Biden may carry Massachusetts easily, but he needs that delegation. And when Richie Neal asks, and a few of the others, he's going to listen to that piece. There's another aspect of this, too, and it's Hampshire County. What happened there. I had the opportunity to stand in a farmer's field in Hatfield when Joe Comerford made the noise, made the primal scream with Senator Gomez and Senator Vilas. And you talk about local. And there we are in the middle of this farmer's field in Hatfield, all these farmers, and she brings out USDA. She brings out the Senate president. And no loan, here's $20 million to start to help you all out. What was stunning to all of us as we stood there with Sudanese farmers and others who had come to this area, it was astonishing to see the work these farmers and their families had done. But we're looking a month after the rains. And my gosh, I want to say 30% of these fields were still underwater. They ain't never coming back.
That is the last time I saw you, Tony, by the way.
That's right. Yeah, we were out there. That was a hot day, too.
Somebody fainted, and Ben Clark just again goes to the rescue. But
Wow.
I'm sorry. So those fields, just to we're watching this now. Very briefly, those fields, many of them. Some of them are still filled with crops that couldn't be picked because of the soil contaminated. And so that is another element of disaster relief when it comes to agriculture, let alone city streets and what's happening in the infrastructure in Springfield. So,
It also got me thinking about the partnership that the United Way of Central Massachusetts made to help. And it partnered with the state, creating this farm resiliency fund, and wondering, in the absence of the federal government stepping up, are we going to see more, do you think, either Tony or John, of these types of efforts of partnership to come in, fill the gap of funding if the government's not going to step up?
I think that's going to be a necessity. And forgive me, John, for just jumping right in. I think that will be the case more and more because of necessity, especially here in Western Mass. You know, you mentioned the groups that you just did, but I was stunned that day in that farmer's field. The Eastern States Exposition showed up because there was agriculture. They had people there, and they contributed money, real hard cash. Let us help out. I think you're going to see it more and more. It's the good neighbor thing. It's going to be a necessity because the Fed and the state can't always do it and can't always do it fast enough. Kudos to Comerford for saying exactly that, and I need you all out here. We can't wait a month, a year, 2 years. And to Jill's point, those fields are still rough, absolutely.
And we can't wait, but we do have to wait a bit longer. Oh, go ahead, John.
John.
No, okay, just to amplify Tony's point there, Governor Healy's actually proposed the creation of a state-level disaster resiliency fund for that very reason, just in case the feds don't step up. And that is language based on legislation sponsored by Senator Comerford and Representative Natalie Bly out of Franklin. This was one of the first conversations I had with Healy when I started covering mass politics was about this, and this is a thing she takes deeply personally. She's told the story a couple of times now about standing outside the house of one homeowner who had left and come back, left for work that morning and come back in that afternoon to find her house underwater, and literally having a conversation with this person as emergency folks rolled up and hammered a condemned sign on this person's house. And the governor got pretty choked up about this. So I think this is something that Healy is taking quite personally, because this is something that she sort of saw firsthand.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wait for a resolution on that matter, but we did see a resolution this week in a different disagreement there, Jill Kaufman. You reported on this for NEPM. It was back to business as usual at Mass MoCA in North Adams on Wednesday. A 3-week strike ended with salary increases that apparently everyone could agree on. And the United Auto Workers rep at Mass MoCA, Chelsea Farrell, said she's hopeful that staff and management can leave the acrimony that we saw during the strike in the past.
The deal itself perhaps signals that as well, given that Mass MoCA was willing to meet us on many of the asks that the union had.
And so, Jill, coming out of this, where exactly did the back and forth land?
Sure. So what we saw as the sticking point was a minimum hourly wage for some part-time employees and then some full-time employees. That was at $16.25 an hour, and the museum was saying, the union rep and the Mass MoCA workers were saying we want $18.25. They came to an agreement since October. They've been negotiating at $18 an hour for that minimum hourly wage. There are also in the new contract various other across-the-board raises for full-time employees that increase their wages over actually 2 years. Both sides came in with 2-year proposals. Nobody expected that. This was supposed to be sort of renegotiating this one facet.
Yeah. And so did we hear anything about the idea of any maximum cap on hours that could be worked? Because I'm especially thinking about festival days there at Mass MoCA, like fresh grass. I remember I believe it was in your reporting, some people telling you, we work really long hours on festival days like that. Did they set a cap?
There's no cap on hours, but there is now overtime as part of the new contract. So if you work more than 10 hours a day, and these are some of the full-time employees who are salaried, whatever their base, hourly rate is, they will get whatever that overtime pay is. But I asked Chelsea Farrell from the union, who we just heard, whether the museum and the union have been talking about a cap on hours, and she said not yet. Safety is on the radar. It's definitely on everybody's mind, but that means that this summer, maybe, I don't know, that you can be working 15 hours a day up on a rig. I'm making that up, but there is no cap. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, I mean, it's a good thing that matters are resolved there at Mass MoCA now. It's a huge part, obviously, of the creative economy. But a different employment sector caught the eye of the Boston Globe this week. It was an editorial. The headline on this one, Western Mass has untapped economic potential. Report identifies opportunities in food science, advanced manufacturing, and clean energy. The report that it referenced there came from the Western Massachusetts Economic Development Council. And I'm quoting here a bit from the Globe editorial. Western Massachusetts is often the neglected stepchild when it comes to statewide economic development. It goes on to say, with new investment, the report argues persuasively that Western Massachusetts could become a driver of innovation, economic activity, particularly in the areas of food science, advanced manufacturing, and clean energy. Tony, no surprise, you are a big cheerleader for Western Massachusetts. What are your thoughts on this?
It was important to see that in the Globe as an opinion piece. Was important to see Mass Inc. a few weeks earlier pick up the exact same piece. Interesting to see what Mass Inc. had to say, though. Slightly different, saying, clarion call, my words. Let's be careful. The 413, Pioneer Valley. Holy smokes, what's happening? And again, I'll go back to what we've seen recently. 11 possible communities in Western Massachusetts may not exist. Good coverage, good reporting. Mass Live, Republican, good response. Comerford, Blaze, Dome, and I hope Sabadosa. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. You're seeing an awakening in Western Mass. We've heard it forever. We're always forgotten. We're always the stepchild. But you got some folks all of a sudden who are saying, I've had it. Enough is enough, and I want to make a noise. And to make that noise at a time when finances of the Commonwealth might be rough, interesting. One last quick thought. Reading the op-ed or the editorial piece from the Globe, reading between the lines. There's the names that are out there. The Charlie D'Amour is a big Y. Read, and you start to think about River Valley in East Hampton and Northampton, the uniqueness of what they're doing with farmers, this co-op. And then you start to think when they mention polymers. We've got one of the biggest polymer players in the city of on the globe is in Springfield. That's astonishing. Most people don't even know they're here. And if I asked people in Boston, have you heard of Eastman in Indian Orchard? And they'll stare at me like, Eastman what? This is what was once Eastman Kodak.
Right.
This is union jobs. I would have to say 80% of the windshields on the planet are coming out of Indian Orchard. Most people don't know that's here. We can attract that kind of worker, that kind of player here in Western Mass. But we need some game out
Well,
of
we'll
Boston.
see if the Globe editorial stirs up some economic
hope so.
development. They're calling for $500 million to help these efforts, and perhaps taking a clue from the Globe's neglected stepchild vibe. Our colleagues at GBH Radio, Margaret Egan and Jim Browdy, had this to say about the editorial.
I think, to be honest, a lot of us are confused about where the Pioneer Valley is. I mean,
You didn't even know what the Pioneer Valley was.
I wasn't sure where the Pioneer Valley
Springfield,
was.
etc. I was there many years ago for the Democratic State Convention. I was covering it for NECN. And I have to say, and I want to say this as carefully as I can, when I went out at night after the convention recess that day, many people think the best strip clubs in the eastern... No, really.
Perhaps Western Massachusetts will be on the map for something other than that, Jim Browdy. Come on out and see what's going on here in Western Mass.
I'm so tired of, and I lived in Boston too. I get it. We center of the universe. I am so tired of this trope. It is so old. I thought it ended with Deval Patrick.
I have to say thanks to our panel.
Yeah.
You'll be back. The rundown's more to come. Stay with us. I'm Carrie Saldo. Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. And now a look at some reporting highlights from our own newsroom and some of our partners. Across Massachusetts, cannabis retailers are filing lawsuits against their host communities, seeking to get their so-called impact fees returned. A few of these lawsuits were filed last year in Pittsfield, and earlier this year, just south of Worcester and Uxbridge, the town refunded $1.2 million back to a cannabis retailer by the town. 4 pot retailers are now suing Great Barrington over these fees. Reporter Heather Bello with the Berkshire Eagle has been reporting on this issue and spoke with NEPM's Carrie Healy.
Let's begin with how we got here. What are impact fees, and what were they designed for?
Well, when pot was legalized in Massachusetts, the state installed strict regulations for the industry and also gave cities and towns an option to charge a community impact fee, and they capped that at 3%. And they did it sort of just in case there were problems, unforeseen problems related to the selling and using of pot in cities and towns. Perhaps if a police department found they were busier than usual, that could be an example. But so far, at least in Great Barrington, the town has said that it has not been able to actually make a clear link to problems and these specific businesses. The town manager in Great Barrington, he came out with a statement when some of these lawsuits were filed. And he said, look, pot shops, you decided to sell weed in this town knowing what the cost would be, in addition to all of your taxes. And you signed those agreements, and those are legal agreements, and we're going to fight this. That's the town manager saying that. And he's also saying that it's only been 5 years since legal pot started to be sold in town, and there may very well be some impact that has not revealed itself yet.
Is it the lack of clear impacts that is enabling retailers to feel like they can ask for those impact fees back?
Yeah, they're asking for their money back. We're looking at more than $6.3 million for all the 4 businesses and the fees that they've paid since 2019. So they're saying every year, Town of Great Barrington, you tell us that we are not creating any significant cost to the town. We're not creating a so-called impact. So now the businesses are, of course, starting to view this as a shakedown. And so that's why they're going to court. And they're also seeing other businesses across the state going to court. And, Pittsfield has stopped collecting the fees, and a lot of cities and towns have stopped collecting them because of these legal tangles. And I believe Boston returned all the fees that they had collected. I think that was in 2022.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting problem for sure.
Was this a surprise to town leaders when they were served this lawsuit?
That's a good question. I don't know. Some of the retailers stopped paying the fees last year. They were behind in their payments. And there was quite a bit of communication and dialogue between the town manager and the owners of these establishments about, can we get our money? And the establishments saying, we would like to work this out with you. We don't feel like we should be paying these fees, and we would like to meet with the town about this.
So if there hasn't been a visible, widespread issue that needed to be mitigated with these fees in Great Barrington. When these suits demand the impact fees are returned, does it matter if the community has already distributed the money to nonprofits? Is there a potential clawback situation that will need to be taken into consideration?
Well, that I don't know. That is going to be, I suppose, a legal issue that is going to be part of all this. And there is some precedent, as you mentioned, with the Uxbridge lawsuit, and there are all these other lawsuits across the state. It's unclear whether they can take the money that they've already spent. And in Great Barrington, that amount is about 1.4 million that's already been distributed to various, nonprofits and the schools. So that's a good question. I don't know.
That was Berkshire Eagle reporter Heather Bello speaking to NEPM's morning host, Carrie Healy. As it starts to feel more like spring, we're nearing the end of a nightly tradition in some Massachusetts cities. Every night this winter, as they do every year, thousands of crows descend. In Lawrence, Massachusetts, it's a scene worthy of a Hitchcock movie. And as GBH Radio's Craig Lamolt reports, in addition to being a source of fascination for local bird watchers, the Lawrence Crow Roost is now a test case for new 3D imaging technology.
We're now 7-8 minutes after sunset. Here's what's going to happen.
Craig Gibson sets up his camera, peers through binoculars, and gets ready to witness a spectacle he's seen hundreds of times.
Early arrivals will start to hover over those trees, and then we will see the streams over there from the southeast. They'll come in from the airport direction. Look, the first one's on top of the tree there.
Gibson's at a busy Lawrence intersection near the Merrimack River as crows start streaming in overhead from several directions. Across Marston Street is an acre or so of trees that the birds are all headed for. Before long, a swarm estimated to be about 14 to 15,000 birds are circling overhead. There are other big crow roosts around, including Springfield and Hartford. But Gibson says Lawrence has the largest roost in New England.
There are times when there are these intermittent, blooming flight bursts that are just dazzling to behold. And other times they kind of quietly work their way into the roost, settle down, and you don't see too many of those intermittent flight bursts. So 7 years out doing this, and it's still, for me, it's as jaw-dropping as the first time I was out here.
Just then, thousands of crows suddenly take off, filling the sky as they circle overhead.
Look at this, look! Oh my goodness! How amazing! Oh, wow!
Gibson recently retired as the Catholic chaplain at Lawrence General Hospital, just up the road from the crow roost. He says in that role, his job was often to provide comfort to people who were sick or dying.
And so at the end of the day, this has been the most beautiful way to kind of buffer between the world of work of a hospital chaplain and then going home to have dinner with my wife or whatever the evening has in store for us.
The crows have grown into a passion. Gibson created a blog about the roost, then a podcast. He shared his photos and writing about the crows online with birding associations. And that's where he heard about a research project funded by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They were looking for a regular roost of thousands of birds to test out an advanced new imaging technology.
And I gave them details about this predictable repeat nightly roost phenomenon, and they said just the right size, exactly what we're looking for.
Andy Goodwin is a research engineer with the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center.
The goal is to be able to measure the flight trajectory of each individual bird in a large flock.
That kind of data could help answer some really interesting questions.
For instance, why don't they bump into one another? Or perhaps, maybe they do, we just don't see it.
The military also wants to learn how to better avoid costly and dangerous bird strikes with their planes. They've partnered with Dale Freed, who's the CEO of a tech company called 3DEO.
If we had one of these systems set up at Logan Airport and you were worried about drones, one or two, or heaven forbid, a whole swarm of drones coming in to do some damage to an aircraft, being able to track all those drones, figure out what they were doing, and devise a countermeasure, that's really important.
To see whether they could do that, the Army awarded Freed a grant to test out a high-tech imaging technology called Geiger mode LiDAR. It's like radar, but
radar uses radio waves to measure distance, and we're using light waves to measure distance.
Freed says this kind of LiDAR system sends out pulses of laser light and does tens of millions of distance measurements every second on the small amount of light that comes back.
Let me move our scan over so we can catch those
Freed's
guys
team
in
rented
there.
out an office space on the top floor of an old Lawrence factory building, overlooking the trees where the crows roost each night.
This box here is kind of a repurposed LiDAR system.
A silver box the size of a mini fridge is mounted in the window with the device's nickname, Tweety, printed on the side. As the sun sets, Freed and his team anxiously wait for the crows to show up, accompanied by the sounds of a ballet studio for kids that's rented the room next door. Freed looks through binoculars as the crows begin to arrive. They're really hard to see from this distance, but the LiDAR system is picking them up.
Oh, look at all those birds. Yeah, it's a lot right now.
Freed points to a computer monitor with a 3D image of the stand of trees. The system is detecting each crow, and they appear as dots as they move around the scene.
We're kind of looking right over the tops of the trees, and then you can see their little clumps around there, and it's not just randomly placed, they're kind of moving in a systematic way, so that's very encouraging.
It's that collective movement that's so fascinating to Craig Gibson. For a lot of birdwatchers, the joy is in spotting something rare or appreciating colorful plumage, but not the crows. Gibson says there's something different that makes this roost special.
We're looking at this aggregation of flying wonders. They lift up, they go back down, and it's this dynamic action that's ever changing every night that I think for all of us is just mesmerizing.
As the weather gets warmer, the nightly spectacle is coming to an end. The rest of the year, these crows either migrate northeast or stay locally without roosting nightly. But Gibson says he'll be here to welcome them all back again next winter. For the New England News Collaborative, I'm Craig Lamoltz.
America's fastest growing sport is pickleball, and it's no different in Western Mass, with courts now available across the region. In Connecticut, Governor Ned Lamont has called it the Taylor Swift of sports. The number of courts popping up in parks has been exciting for some and a major annoyance for others. WSHU's Sabrina Garone reports on the solutions entrepreneurs have come up with.
I play tennis at Milford's Eisenhower Park when the weather's nice, and there's usually some waiting around involved for a court to free up. That was hardly an issue this summer. In fact, some nights my group was the only one there. But on the newly added pickleball courts across the park, most nights all 8 were in use and crowds of folks were waiting to play. So, what is pickleball?
It's ping pong or table tennis standing on the table.
Angelo Rossetti is a pickleball national champion and coach. Of course, you're not really standing on the table, but you're hitting a wiffle ball over a low net with something that resembles a ping pong paddle. Rossetti says the game is relatively simple. You keep the ball in motion without hitting the net or letting the ball bounce twice like in tennis, but it is still challenging.
And you can still have a competitive game.
And since there's less court to cover, all skill levels and ages can mix together in pickleball, men, women, young, and old. But the sport has been known to attract older crowds.
Your recovery, your hand-eye coordination, your alertness, and also your brain activity. So I think it's great for your mental health in particular, not just your physical health.
Pickleballer Eileen Torres says for her, it's all about community.
It's just a wonderful game that brings everyone together. You meet wonderful people from all backgrounds and just have a lot of fun.
And that community has grown so much, Torres says Milford is running out of room.
More courts with lights that stay open later at night, absolutely.
All sounds pretty good, right? Not if you live near the outdoor pickleball court.
Yeah, it's a loud sport. It's a plastic paddle and a plastic ball, so it does make noise. And yes, residents that are near the pickleball courts complain, but there's only so much you can do about it.
So Brian Malia opened an indoor pickleball court in Milford in November. He says local players were very excited.
It was awesome. It was great. Thank God somebody's finally doing it. Now we have a place to play in the winter, bad weather, etc.
Malia's Shoreline Pickleball is just one of a handful of indoor facilities to open in Connecticut recently.
I speak with other owners of clubs that haven't opened yet, won't open for a couple of years, that are investing a lot more than we did. So I do see the growth. They are expanding into collegiate levels nationwide already. It's not going anywhere.
For the New England News Collaborative, I'm Sabrina Carone.
That's our show for this week. The Rundown theme is courtesy of The Love Crumbs. Our director is Tony Dunn. Our board op is Phil Bishop. Our engineers are Betsy Langto, Kara Foster, Art Rankin, and Chuck Dubay. Production support and digital is courtesy of Ayush Suryawan. I'm Carrie Saldo. Join us next week for The Rundown here on 88.5 and EPM.